What's his name? Mansa. Huh? Amrit, let me know. Are you ready? Are we ready?
Yeah.
Have you think, oh, they've got more visitors. Give it one more minute now. Sastikali, I do. Reach you to make sure that I'm going to push up. Okay, Sat Sri Akal Ji, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I think you've all seen the WhatsApp group poster, so you know why you're here. Okay, so I was speaking to Aji and a few members here last year, and so I was supposed to come in November, and that was the week I got COVID, so I had to stay away. So I worked with Aji to get a new date, but I think at the time it was really about bringing what we do to the audience at Milton Keynes. And really, we're called A Little History of the Sikhs, and it's little because 3 reasons. I have lots of help and experts to do the Guru period, so I don't teach the Guru period, no? Because we have lots of Punjabi school teachers, historians, and they cover from 1469 up to 1708, and then another 100 years up to 1820. So really, for young people, there's lots of information on Google about the Guru period. My specialist subject is 1820 onwards, and then 1950s onwards, modern day Sikh history. So I call it the little history. It's not the great history of the Sikhs. I call it, it's a notch below, but it's really about social history, economic history, migration stories, and really for the young people here, it's your history, because if you're born in this country, it's trying to tell that history. And that history is not really presented on Gurdwara stages or in Punjabi schools. So that's why we're a little bit different. The other reason we're called A Little History of the Sikhs is because we grew out of a Punjabi school. I taught this in a Punjabi school, so if I switch to Punjabi, I'm sure everyone's okay here. Ji Punjabi thodi bahti bachcha na bol liye. No, Allah dekh lange, ye kar lange idhar. And the other bit is little, is because when I taught Punjabi, children didn't have a long attention span. So the great histories we know, I teach them in very small chunks, and it's like the Instagram world. You just swipe on, karija, swipe on, because kids can take on a lot of information, but the way I teach it, they'll remember more than sitting for 1 hour and just going through a book and turning a page. So on that note, let's go to Page Dancing Sub. Right, that's good. This is where I come from. We run a Punjabi school. Has anyone been to Gurdwara Karam Sar Ilford?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So you know we got a Punjabi school which is about here. Now we've got a big court which is about here. So we have about 10 rooms, and we fill them on a Saturday, Sunday, and we do not much with them Monday to Friday. So we're still trying to work. But every year we have a camp, and every year in the camp I have to present a new topic. Yeah? And I have to keep it engaging, because I understand Essex kids, and because my children are from Essex, I grew up in Essex, so I have to make it innovative and new. And the first lecture we did, we called it the Karamsar lecture in 2008, 2009, was based on Monopoly. It was called Sikh History on the Streets of London. We have now probably about 10 different lectures, but you cover so much history. And the interesting thing is that I've grown up with those children, I've seen them and they remember it, because now they're at university and they ask me to come back and teach it there. So I'm just growing my own way of working. So you're 14, so when you're 18 and you're at university, you should be able to reach out to us and say either you're going to do it or you want my slides. But the interesting thing is this. How old are you? 8? 9. Can you read that? Can you see that? I don't, yeah. Come and help me. So this is the mantra of A Little History of the Sikhs. If you read that, and then you can turn around and read it. Actually, you can read it on that. You can read it nice and loud.
The past is always alive. If it is remembered, knowledge has life and power, as long as it is saved from human forgetfulness.
So that was your practice. Now you're going to read it like you know. You've already practiced it, so now say it with confidence.
The past is always alive. If it is remembered, knowledge has life and power, as long as it's saved from human forgetfulness.
Nice one, well done. What's your name? Just sit here, because you don't have to help me again. So, I believe, like this one with A Little History, the past is always alive. It's around you. The buildings speak to you. Architects build buildings for a minimum 400 years, when they start a project. It's always alive, but you have to remember it. And knowledge, this knowledge has a lot of life. It has power, and it will help you in your careers and whatever you want to do in the future. But you've got to save it from being forgotten. And even Guru Amar Das, he talks about this. Do you go Punjabi school?
Yeah.
Yeah. How much did you learn? Did you get to 20? All of it?
Yeah.
Go on, try the top line. Can you do it?
Huh?
Can you try it? Confidence?
Yeah.
Karla.
Bahaniya, kahaniya, books, today.
Is your Punjabi school teacher here? He's doing all right. That's good. My Essex kids are doing Babaniya, kahaniya. Right, Babaniya, kahaniya, putta sa putta kareem. Guru Amar Das Ji says that. What does that mean?
The legendary stories of one's ancestors transform big children into extraordinary children.
So that's A Little History of the Sikhs, right? So when we do it in the Gurdwara, we're talking about our shaheeds, our gurus, etc. When we talk about it in A Little History, we're talking about this, but I'm still trying to link it together somehow, So these are the stories of our forefathers in England. Yeah? So let's go page down. What we do is we try and present history in a new way, which is through walking tours. ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਨੂੰ ਕਬਜ਼ਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ 1849. They took over, yeah. And when they took over, they looked for war reparations, they looked for compensation, and they bought everything here. Every single thing they took from Lahore, they brought to England. Yeah, so there's lots on the streets of England, just around you, and I have 8 to 10 different walking tours in London, 3 hours, 6 sites per tour. And all this stuff, it's not just Maharaja Ranjit Singh's throne and the Kohinoor. There's 108 other different items that are free to see. Paintings, swords, shastras, shields, coins, stamps, the stars. Everything they could take, they took and they brought here. Yeah? So we have those tours. Can we go page down? So we have tours across England. So we even have a history tour in Kent. All the stuff they took. History tour in Brighton, history tour in Oxford, which is close to you, and history tour in Thetford, so we cover regions in England now. And this stuff is free to see, we just don't know. And we can see it. Yeah, and we can learn from it, and we can make it a part of our life or our career going forward. Page down. And we can go to Europe. You don't realise that we have Sikh history in Scotland, Isle of Wight, Spain, and France. I've now got Italy, Malta, Cyprus, Greece, Sweden, Germany. How long do I carry on? It just goes on and on and on. Sweden's got a lot of Sikh history as well. So you have to cover a different lecture for that one. So today's lecture, Waheguru, let's go down, page down. So this is where it's going to get complicated. It's called Premier League Sikhi. Now the way I teach children Sikhi in England is how many football clubs are there in England? Divisions 1 to 4, there's 92. 92, right? And then you have the conference. So 92 towns and cities. We're not here till tomorrow, so we will concentrate down to a little bit just Premier League 2030. I did this with a group called FIFA Singhs. They are a group of Singhs who just play FIFA all day, all around the country. They network, but it keeps your Sangat together, and they raise money for charity when they do this. They give trophies, big trophies for people who sit and press buttons on a computer. Oh, you're recording this, so we better not tell them this. I started this one in 2013 as a Garamsa lecture, but basically we're going to learn Sikh history through towns and cities, through their football club icons. You pick a team, you learn a little history. That's how we're going to spend the time. And that's today's date. So chalo, page down. This is how we do it. Recognise some of these? You do, because you've got one on your face. So you pick a team, and I'll tell you a little Sikh history to do with that story. How does that sound? Do you support a football team? No, I don't think you do. You're only 9. It's okay. So we have so we do this in different ways, but football, this one was football in England, doing the football. So there's some you can just point to, or you can pick. And if you go page down again, sorry, what's your name? Morecambe. If you go page down. So we've got more on the second page, but let's go page up. Yeah. So we'll pick one, because you're probably the youngest one here. You can come and pick one. You can either touch the screen, and it's not touch screen, or you can just move the mouse to a logo that you like. And then you have to click on it. Morecambe is our IT expert. So let's see if you no, this isn't a mouse, this is the presentation. So we have to do it this way. And then stop somewhere. Okay, hold on. Okay, did you go back a page up? Pick one, or just point to it. That one, Brighton. So you click on it. Oh. Okay, no, the Brighton's probably not a good one. I'll start again. You have to test these things a lot. I can pick a different one then, and we'll come back to Brighton. No signal. Will that signal come back? Shall I push the cable in harder, see?
Try the computer as well.
This one, did you pick walls? So you picked this one here. Okay, cool. Right, hold on. Let's see if we can get a signal back so the team can see. Can you try, buddy? Just. Oh, right, okay, yeah, probably would have moved. So maybe, Morecambe, you're going to have to stay in charge of this one now. We're going to have to just pick a team instead. Right, there we go, brilliant. Okay, so you're picked Wolves, yeah? Because I come from Garamsa, this is a nice way of just telling kids about Santisha Singh. You can take a seat now. She's picked the right one. So, Santisha, has anyone heard of Santisha Singh? So he passed away in Wolverhampton on the night of the 25th and 26th of August, Crowther Road. The room that he passed away in is still preserved as a museum by the family. They haven't touched it, they haven't changed it since that day. But, so it's now called the Baba Ishir Singh Darshan. Is that correct? Has anyone visited that from here? It's in Wolverhampton. But there is another link, page down. So if I have a number there, then that means there's 2 slides in Wolverhampton. So in Wolverhampton we had the Turbine dispute in April 1969. Does anyone understand anything about the Turbine dispute? Okay, cool. I might ask you to help me here because does anyone know who the Singh Sandhu was then? Because this is how I find it's interesting when I walk around.
Bus driver.
That's it. So, but he wasn't related to anyone here, right? Okay. But do you know about this a little bit?
Yeah, and there is a documentary about him.
BBC it was on, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then he had to fight his case, and then there's one lawyer, father and son.
Jolly something.
Yeah, in I think they are part of the Nishkam. They have their offices in front of Nishkam. So
Yeah, okay. That's a different one. That's Mandla case. That's the
Mandla case, yeah.
This one, this is the gentleman, Mr. Swan Singh Jolly. So what happened is, in the 1960s, we didn't have the Equality Act, the Race Relations Act, etc. We were a long way from that. So actually, it was a HR uniform policy decision on whether you could wear a dastard. So what they said, because bus driver was kind of a premier job, you're sitting down all day. A conductor, you could get away with, but a driver, that's saved for the top people. And the way they would protect those jobs, like they do in the unionised working class field, is they would say that you don't conform to the uniform policy, you cannot wear our uniform because of your dastard, therefore you cannot apply for the job. And a lot of our Sikhs had come over from actually East Africa. They had good jobs in East Africa, so the police would stop you, the bus driver would stop you, the Royal Mail would stop you, and so you ended up having to stay in the factory. Yeah? But they started to take their cases up. Now, the same thing, Sandhu, he was banned from driving a bus because they said he grew a beard, you know? So his dada was open. So that was a policy decision. So the bus garages were saying, we're not saying anything about the turban, we're talking about the beard. So if it wasn't one, it was the other, you know? So Jolly Saab then took an oath, and he said, I will burn myself to death. You know, I would light myself in flames if Wolverhampton Bus Garage can't change their policy. And they did change their policy, and I think 69, so 2019 would have been 50 years of that happening, and that's why they made that BBC documentary. I think with him or his son, or someone was on the bus, and they were going round, and it was that young lady who was reliving that story. And now if you go to Wolverhampton, there's lots of Siddhartha bus drivers in that garage, and they're all like running the buses now. But this was our first case, so you have to pioneer. That's it, little history done, swipe, let's move on. But so what you have to do now, you have to click on the logo. I'll do it so you don't worry the wires. You click here, it takes you back to the home page. Okay, now we pick a different one. Arsenal, Waiguru, let's go to Arsenal. This is what I asked the kids. Was Uddham Singh an Arsenal fan? Because, so do we recognise that picture from Amritsar? Yeah, so if you go to Amritsar, Harmandir Sahib, they have the Central Sikh Museum upstairs. Yeah? So on the Parikrama, one side, that's the painting they have of Uddham Singh in Amritsar, in the museum. That's that. This is his passport photo. So this is when he was younger, but when he came to England, he had this form, because that's his passport photo. And there were very few Sikhs in England at that time. So he obviously wanted to stay under the radar, and he didn't want to be recognised easily. Does anyone know who this man is, even though it says it there? Welcome. Dyer. So this is Dyer, and this is O'Dwyer, Michael O'Dwyer. This is the general, this is his boss. So we know what happened at Amritsar. You've got to the Amazon one now as well. Okay? So that Amazon one had 1 hour of what happened. Gandhi has 30 seconds of what happened, and most Bollywood films have about 1 minute, 2 minutes. They talk about the after effect, but they don't talk about the actual event, where this new Amazon documentary spent 1 hour, you know, on just what was happening as they were trying to take the injured to these hospitals around the gullies of Amritsar. That's why it's personal to Sikhs. I think the documentary went. Have you seen it, Budgie? The same.
Yeah, I know the history of that. Honestly, I also saw the movie Shaheed Uddham. I don't like that.
Yeah. The problem is, in Bollywood, they're always going to take a different angle on it. And even the new one, historically, it's got a lot of new. So which is why we can go to other sources as well. So we've got 4 slides here. So we have Dyer and O'Dwyer. We have Uddham Singh. He arrives in England. O'Dwyer's already dead by that time. He died of cancer in 1920s, in 21. So he was applauded in Parliament. The Daily Mail had a whip round with all their readers, said he'd done a sterling job on protecting the rights of the empire. But I think in reality he couldn't live with the horrors of, because he had to have a committee to go to and explain his actions, and never treating the wounded, shooting at this height, not above the head, all of this stuff. So his own internal, I think, pain killed him by 1921-22. You know? And he was stripped of all his pensions and honours, and then the Daily Mail readers gave him money to survive on. You know? That was his act. But this was the main protagonist, because he told him your actions were correct. So Michael O'Dwyer then came, page down, then came to Caxton Hall and was giving a speech actually about Kenya. He was actually saying, if there is a Mau Mau uprising in Kenya, he says, I will have no hesitation in repeating what I did in Amritsar in Kenya. Imagine that. And while he was saying that speech, Uddham Singh shot O'Dwyer at Caxton Hall, page down. And Caxton Hall is still there now. It's part of one of our tours. But actually, it's just the front that's protected. The back is a block of new offices. These are all flats. So that's when we do our tours. And what's on number 4? I don't know why didn't come into the picture. So there wasn't 4. Go back up, page up. Okay, page up. Page up. Page up. There it is. And this is his house when he lived. So he had a lot of different addresses in London. He was the East London Sangat say he was around Barking, the West London Sangat say he was at Shepherd's Bush, the South London Sangat say he came to South London, he went to Ireland, he went to Germany, lots of different stories. Now until the 1970s, the stories that the British wrote about Udham Singh, I have the books, and it was quite interesting the perspective they were putting on it. So he was hanged in 1940 after 50 years, no, after 30 years. The court papers should have been released in the 1970s. So these writers started to write about that case. And because, you know, basically he shot quite a few people of the cabinet. You know, it's like taking Boris, Priti Patel, and a few others out at the same time. They got injured, but the main man, yeah. So this was very embarrassing for MI5 and MI6, internal security and external security. How did this happen? How could it happen? And then the court papers were never released. So you don't know if the court papers around Muhammad Singh Azad was talking about independence and the atrocities, or he was talking about atrocities of empire, or other theories were coming to the front. And the theories in the 1970s were that he was an orphan in Amritsar. He was in jail in the 1920s. So how could he have had a British passport and come to England? Because like America, if you have a criminal record, you can't enter the country. So how the hell did he get in? Then the theory came in the 1970s that actually MI6 or MI5 were paying him to keep an eye on the British Gurdwara Party movement in the UK. And then he became a double agent and crossed the hand. That feeling, this was the theory in the 1970s when these books came out. So that was like, a film could be made about this, you know, that he crossed MI5. Then came the 50-year rule. These papers should be released, and the government didn't release them. Then came the 75-year rule, and they won't release them. Now it's the 100-year rule. They won't release it until we forget about it. It's not a big deal anymore. But they keep saying we're not releasing the papers. You know, so you can have all these other history, the Irish problems. Those papers come released. The government apologise. You know, but now I think Anita, I've got her name. Anita Anand. Yeah. So she's written a book, and I think that's the most comprehensive book. And what you learn from that was using a multiple aliases when he was going around. That's why it's very difficult to work out his history, because he was changing his name. He went to America, went to Ireland, went to Germany, he was anti-empire. So he was actually working, but he was being kept, an eye was being kept on him. And then I think it's quite embarrassing for the authorities to know that this could happen under their noses, that basically cabinet members could be shot at in 1940s England during the war period.
He was hanged somewhere in North London as well.
All of this is part of the tour. So what we do, first night was at Brixton Prison. Then he went to Magistrates Court, and he was hanged in Pentonville Prison, which is on the Monopoly board, so that's on the Monopoly when you land on the blue. But in Pentonville Prison, in the main square, they had a grave and it said US on it. So everyone thought it was something to do with the United States of America. It was only in the 1970s that they realised this means Udham Singh, so they exhumed his body, took it back to India in 1976 for sanskar, for Antim sanskar. I think there's even photos of him coming back, his body, and all of the kind of the interest it generated. Ready to move on, Malcolm? Did you even know who Udham Singh was? You must do. Watch Amazon. Right. But there's books about him. Like a lot of people in India, he's very, very revered, because they call him like an Indian freedom fighter, but I think it depends what angle you come at it. I think it was the Amritsar story for him was his driver. But then Bhagat Singh was the same time, and he was part of that whole anti-empire movement. Let's go click on Arsenal and see. We'll cover Brighton when we get back to another page, so we have to click on Arsenal. It takes us back to the home page. We know Brighton is a bad link. Jollof in Manchester City, where are we going?
Manchester City.
Where is it?
Left.
Right there. What's with that? Yeah, be careful with that. Right, let's go. Does anyone know about this one? So the Motorcycle Crash Helmet Act of 1976. This was actually a 1960s one. This is where you see Winston Churchill stand up in Parliament and say they didn't have to wear helmets when they fought in World War I, but now you're telling them to wear helmets on a thing. So all of this movement, they had basically the Motorcycle Crash Helmet Act in 1960 and said if you're going to wear a helmet, if you're going to ride a motorbike, you need a helmet. Sikhs can't wear helmets. In India, we're exempt from a lot of this. protection stuff, you know. So you know, in this country, so when I work and I go on a construction site sometimes, it's my choice whether I wear a patka that day and take a helmet, or I wear a bug. I just don't even go in, I just stay outside sometimes. But what I'm saying is, we have exemptions in law now that say that your religious identity is protected, and then it's your choice. As a cyclist, you can wear a cyclist with a star, or a helmet if you want to wear a beersky or a patka. But he wasn't allowed to ride his moped because he had a dastar. So this is him in Manchester riding a simple moped, and people were treating him with so much respect from the community because he was standing up for his rights. Then, by 1976, Chapter 62, we got a religious exemption for the Motorcycle Crash Helmet Act. And all of this stuff goes through Parliament. So even we have the, you know, like recently there, the knife stabbings were happening in London a lot. Government have to deal with it. And then it's only because we had 2 Sikh MPs that we were allowed to keep Gurbans. Not just the Gurban, I'm talking about when we do a Nagar Kirtan, if you got Offensive Weapons Act going on, and then you've got a Nagar Kirtan with 5 Sikhs with 3-foot Gurban, you know, that's going to raise problems. And it's only because we had representation in Parliament that they were able to take it through the House of Lords and get an exemption for Sikhs to have 3-foot Gurbans as ceremonial.
So that goes to show that we need more MPs.
We need more, but we need to be involved in decision-making structures, because I feel I'm close to some MPs and they don't even know any Sikhs. And I say, why don't you even know? Everyone knows what a Sikh is. They go,
So unfortunately, we don't come out of the Gurdwaras.
but they also say that we have no constituents who are Sikhs, because, you know, the MP, he's from Lambeth. He goes, I've never been to a Gurdwara. You haven't got one in Lambeth. He goes, you don't understand. We only look after our constituents. And a lot of us are concentrated in East London, South or Birmingham. That's it, you know. So they're not going to see us if we don't. We should, but anyway, you know, we could have an MP. But with the system, you know, it doesn't align with us really to go into politics, because it's everything you've seen in the last 3 years or so. If we went as Sikhs, we'd have to clean up politics as well as go. Otherwise, you know, I just find there's so much going on that you have to be really on top of everything. It's hard to survive in Westminster if you go in with noble intentions, you know. But he then, he actually fought for turban-wearing men to be exempt. And then if we go page down, in Manchester, in 2016, which was 40 years after 1976, the family had the moped still there.
Oh my God.
They put it back on display at the Manchester Central Library, and Turban Man's Victory Day helmet, etc. So these things are happening. They're part of our UK history, you know. And they kept his same moped, and they tell the story, you know. And it stayed on for most of that year, you know. And it was all about activism. You know. Let's see if the logo takes you back to the home page. That's Manchester City done. That's one of the stories in Manchester. Right, what are we going to do? Okay. Next, volunteers. 1, 2. I'm going youngest first. Any more young people in the audience?
I don't know, is Cambridge up there?
Cambridge, I've got loads of Cambridge stories actually. We could go Oxford if you want. Page down. Do you want to go? Are you at Cambridge?
No, just
But, no, it will be on there. I've got loads of Cambridge stories, but I need to keep filling this space. You want to go Oxford instead?
sure.
Okay, right, good. Let's go Oxford instead. Click on that one, see if it'll take you to Oxford. Ah, why is it taking us to Everton? Hyperlinks have all gone wrong. Okay, let's see. No. That's bad. You know, this is why I need to keep looking at my stuff. Why is it all going to, slide 7's no good. Hold on. Let me just
Why don't you go to Everton and I go to Oxford then?
Yeah, no, I should do, but you know when my hyperlinks don't work, I get upset. Okay, now we're going to have to blow in that cable again. It's going to come back, buddy. It's going to come back. We're blowing it. We're blowing that cable. These are very sensitive cables. Cambridge, there is a Sikh story in Cambridge actually. I'll explain it. When I do Newcastle, then we'll explain Cambridge. But at Oxford, we come across Hardit Singh Malik. Heard the name or heard the story?
Pilot. The pilot.
He is a pilot, but not only a pilot. He actually studied at Balliol College in Oxford. He was sponsored to come here. There was actually an 1835 Act, Education Act, with Oxford University in India. What they wanted to do was educate Indians in the UK, so they would go back to India and help run the country the way the UK is run. Yeah. So they had lots of Indians coming to Oxford over the years, Oxford University. They even had the first Punjabi school in Oxford. It's called the Indian Institute. They taught Punjabi, Sanskrit, Hindi to English people who wanted to go and work in India. Right? It's still there now. It's now a private institute, but the outside is still all very Indian. So Hardit came, and he came in the pre-First World War to study. He was at Balliol College, and there was a guy called Benjamin Jowett, and he was setting up the department for Indians to come over. A lot of them came. It was actually Jowett Row. He was one of the longest serving, I don't know what they call them, chancellors of Oxford University, but he was very sympathetic to Indians. What actually happened was a lot of them came here, saw what happened, went back and became Indian independence people. So they started serving for India. They actually went on the other side and were campaigning for independence because they saw that actually you're democracy here and we're treated as second class over there. So Malik came, but in 1914, when war broke out, he had an interest in flying, had obviously done some flying, and volunteered to fight for the RAF here in the UK. And they said no. They said no because you are not British or English. You know, you're wearing the star and blah, blah, blah. So what happened is he went and volunteered for the French, and the French took him in. That caused a lot of embarrassment to the British, that the French have accepted him and we haven't, so they took him in there in the end, yeah, because of the embarrassment factor. Yeah. So then he came and he did that. He had a distinguished career in the First World War. He was also a golfer, all these other things, quite an interesting man. And at the end of his RAF career, he became an ambassador, and he was, I can't remember which countries, I'm sure France was one of them. He was
Canada.
In Canada, yeah. So he spent time there, and quite distinguished. So this book is coming out soon, Stephen Barker's research. We do a joint tour in Oxford. We follow his footsteps around one of the stories in Oxford. And his book will be out, The Flying Sikh. But he was also a Pradhan of the Central Gurdwara Jatha, which I think is missing from that book because I've heard this lectured out. He says so people will only pick up what they know. And Stephen's doing it on Oxford. You know? So he picked up all his stories. These photos were coming out, which were unseen before. You know, and the tree that he was standing against in another photo is still there today. These little things bring alive this story. And he was serving Pradhan of a Gurdwara, but also flying for the RAF and could speak French and an ambassador. So why wouldn't he be a role model, you know, for young people today?
I think what was very interesting when you go to Oxford Museum, there's a cutout.
Yeah,
it's so significant.
And you know who did all?
Walk in there.
Yeah, and you know who did all of that? Stephen did all of that. Stephen Barker. The cutout. You can go and hear his voice. You can sit down.
Oh yes, of course.
The telephone. So when we do our Oxford tour, we go in. But all I imagine, if Stephen wasn't even part of it, no one would even know that.
Who is Stephen?
He's just tour guide like me.
Oh.
You know, he's an ex-retired teacher. So he does this tour for a lot of women's institute, local groups. He goes and talks about Hardit Singh Malik. He does about 50 lectures a year. You know, they book him in for 1 hour, and then he goes and tells the Malik story. So he's on a stamp now from India as well. But his story will be turned into a film because now we have a book. Because what will happen? Books turn into films. If you don't write the books, the people don't pick it up to make a story. Films don't come out of thin air, Netflix. They all come from books.
Yeah, he was helped by the Canadian Barker.
Canadian Barker, yeah.
He wasn't helped by the British to gain his position in the RAF. He was the Canadian Barker. Institute.
Yeah, I know the French ones because they accepted it, didn't they? And then the Canadian.
There's a Canadian guy,
Yeah.
Barker, who got
Barker who involved.
commissioned into the RAF.
Who was working for the British.
I have to read his book.
Well respected.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah, he's
somebody wrote
first.
on his
Yeah,
behalf, and he said, "Yep, we'll
yeah, we'll have him. And he didn't get shot down. There was quite a few pilots who did get shot down in the Indian forces. You
He
know.
still had the bullet in his leg, didn't he?
I think, yeah, and he still was a golfer after that as well. So you think, you know, his story, interesting. Is it interesting? Let me see if my hyperlink works. Yes, okay.
Well, we got MK Dons there.
MK Dons, let's go to MK Dons. I did want to pick some stuff around here, Milton Keynes. Let's see the link. You know what I've done? I tidied up the presentation. I've gone in my history and gone to an older version of that presentation. So what we're going to do, is every time I press escape and it goes, I'm going to do the last 3 slides first and then we'll go back to the presentation. And let's get this slide.
About the ex-Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's scholarship in Oxford, is that?
No, I'm not sure if that's an active scholarship. I'm looking for it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's a one-off or is it an annual.
It is definitely active. Because I saw there was some news kids coming from India.
Baru Sahib always promotes that. I went looking for that person. I couldn't find him yet. Harkeerat Singh, remember? When we did the tour, we were trying to find which college she attends. There's a young Sikh lady on the first scholarship, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure if you do a search on it, you will find some students
Just trying.
who got scholarship. I think they do 20 or something who comes over here.
20.
Yeah, something like that.
That's a lot. Then we should be seeing that in the. I'm not. You know, we're very good at launching things and moving on. I'd be surprised if it's 20 and it's carried on 4 or 5 years on. I know he came back and someone would have launched it then, but I'm not sure if it's an active scholarship. But I don't know. It might be a £10,000 scholarship, which at least helps them for 1 year or so. Might be postgrad. Right, Milton Keynes Dons, the Leap Singhs. They actually lived in Buckinghamshire. Sophia and Hilda, Catherine Hilda. The house is called Hilton Hall after Catherine Hilda, the Leap Singh. I went there in a village called Penn, near the, what's the services? Beaconsfield Services. It's near there. Yeah, near.
We had a lady come here a while back, Countess Howe. She
Right.
was with Penn, and we told her about it.
Good.
She lives in Penn.
She lives in Penn.
Yeah. So the Hilton Hall, you can't see it from the road. Is that me? That's okay. Oh, it's someone's bag, that's okay. It must be in a bag or jacket over the front. Okay. No one owning up? It's alright, it's only relax, Benji, don't worry about it. We'll be out. ठीक है you don't only 3-4 बारी phone करना देखियो. No, it's alright, it must be. I was going to say it must be EastEnders, but it's not. A reminder. But no, so Catherine obviously was a resident here. Hilton Hall. Do you know any aspects of her story which are depicted here by a famous artist called Inquisitive? This was commissioned last year, this painting. So what they're describing here is that's her photo. I think she only ever used to speak to Sophia in Punjabi. They were so anti-British by that time that they only spoke to each other in Punjabi to maintain their roots and their connections to Punjab. They went to Punjab and they saw that we're living like princesses here, but our history and our families and our people are living so poorly in India. And to resist what Queen Victoria was doing, they spoke to each other in Punjabi and they agreed that that's what they're going to do. Or Urdu Punjabi, whatever Lahore spoke, that's what they did. This is quite interesting. And this is quite interesting because she actually lived in Germany with one of her teachers for a long period of her life, and she helped to smuggle out Jewish families and Jewish children and bring them, save them from World War II events, and actually kept them at Hilton Hall because it was so big with so many bedrooms. So even today, those people now go back, they're invited over, they go back to Hilton Hall to see where they're much older, but they're children now. And they still say thank you. There was at least, I think last year about 16 families, you know, and Jewish families were saved from Auschwitz by Catherine and then her sister Sophia, and it's all linked. So there's another film that can be made, you know.
So Sophia, of course, was a suffragette.
We'll get to her as well now. So we might as well. We'll go down to Brentford. So if we go to Brentford, Brentford is in Hounslow, and there's a river that crosses Hounslow, and the other side of it is Richmond upon Thames. And you have a palace on the Thames called Hampton Court Palace, and within that estate was an apartment house, Faraday House, that was given to Sophia. So she lived at Hampton Court, which was a grace and favour apartment when she was attending events at Buckingham Palace or at Hampton Palace. So she would stay there. Then she had her pen house and she had her Thetford house. And that's what princesses do. They go from event to event, house to house, with their maids and servants and everything, and attend balls and galas and dinners. And that's her. There's quite a few books now. Ballyroy has a book, The Royal Rebel. Sophia, the Suffragette, is this one. And this is Anita Nun's book, A Princess, a Suffragette and a Revolutionary. Now, she actually was, when Emily Pankhurst, have you covered suffragettes at school yet? Emily Pankhurst. So in the syllabus, it's always Emily Pankhurst, Emily Pankhurst. You know, the film is Emily Pankhurst, the suffragette film. But when Emily Pankhurst passed away, the next person in line who took over the Richmond Union was Sophia. And she played a long role in the suffragette movement. Because what they did is they gave rights in a piece by piece. It wasn't straight away, 90 women have got full rights. It was actually only land-owning women could vote first, then these women could vote next, and slowly. So she kept that movement going. This is a stamp. So she's the first Sikh that was memorialised on a British UK stamp. And it's Sophia Dalip Singh selling the suffragette in 1913 outside Hampton Court Palace. That's a photo from that time. She's now in a first class. It's at £1.57 stamp. Interesting thing was, because she was a Maharaj Kumari, she had a lot of jewellery from Lahore. So the way the suffragette movement used to work was you would be disobedient, you would be arrested and taken to overnight prison. In the morning, a magistrate would look at your misdemeanour and assign a fine. If you pay the fine, you can be out. If you don't pay the fine, you stay in prison for a little bit longer. And that's how the system is. So they used to sell her jewellery to pay for the fines for women to go in, out. They could do it again, then go in again, go out. And she was basically just selling off her family jewellery to do that. And that was all recorded in the Times newspapers at the time. There's a lot of depth to her story, and that's just one part of it. She was also a kennel club member. She was also a cyclist. So many of the modern themes that we have, can be taken back to a Sikh woman who actually was proud of her Punjab heritage. And she died in Golders Green. Her ashes were scattered in Golders Green. Catherine, not sure, but Bamba, her older sister, is buried in Lahore, in Christian cemetery in Lahore. I have to work out that, Catherine. I don't want to get it wrong. Right, now we're going to go, we can't even go back to the home page, can we? Because I want to, no, we could. Okay. Anyone else? Next. Benji? Your point. Liverpool. You support Liverpool? So do I. That's all right. I wanted to talk about Liverpool because Liverpool, I have a film about Liverpool, but I'm not going to play it because it's probably not hyperlinked. Early Sikh Peddlers in Liverpool. Do you know Liverpool is that city of gold? Because basically they were taking slaves from Africa, stopping in Liverpool, auctioning them off in Liverpool, making the profits, then taking them off to America. So the Liverpool was a city that's actually built on the slave trade. So the ships were coming in. Therefore, it has lots of docks and ports. And therefore, in the 1900s, if you were going to come to England and you were looking for opportunities, you would head to ports because ports offered quick employment. You just start in the morning, start work. Yeah. So we have this Bartra movement that first came. So this is pre-World War I. So this is very, very early Sikhs. We're talking 1910s, 1920s, and then 1930s. And they would go to the docks. They would put their best suit on, and with the star, they would have a full dara, obviously, and they would go to the dock, and they would say, "Oh, you're not strong enough. You're too old because you've got a beard." And these guys were 21, 22, so they were being rejected. And this whole film is by Liverpool Libraries. I'll send the link to you, and you can share it. But it talks about a young kid going to the libraries and realising all these stories and how hard peddling was. So because they couldn't work in the docks, they started doing what the London Bartra Sikh community used to do in Whitechapel, which was peddling. And peddling means you fill up a suitcase with things that housewives would need, then you would knock on the door and sell them dishcloths, sponges that you use, the plates, that kind of stuff, and then gopra, and that kind of stuff is what they were doing. That's what they were doing in London. So they had a connection to the London peddlers, then you're selling that stuff in Liverpool just to keep your head above water and earn some money. And it's hard work. Bradford, Manchester. So what the Sikhs did very quickly was, when the Jewish people used to do it, they didn't have that travel trust in mind, so they would have to come back to the factories to collect the stuff, then spend all that money on the travel to get to wherever they're selling, so they kept it quite local. What the Sikh peddlers did very quickly, because with their own brotherlies involved and they're all on trust, they were pushing goods through cities, but through carriage on trust. Punjab, you remember Liverpool, like Saman. So they cut out all that travel cost.
Afghan Sikhs do that.
Who?
Afghan
Yeah,
Sikhs.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there is a common bond which wasn't in that, so they built upon that trade.
Well, I've always wondered where in India they come from, these people.
I think, I've never seen them around our villages, so Delhi or partition, were they affected by partition? I know they were very close to Maharaja Ranjit Singh, so when they came to Ipswich, they came to Ipswich because Dalip Singh lived nearby. We want to be near our king. But, you know, but peddling, bartras, think at that time, fortune tellers, so they came back to do this kind of stuff. Bartre, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Bartre, yeah. But Bartre, Bart Sikh community, they call it.
So they usually, they're slightly nomadic.
Slightly
They-
nomadic.
They were, and then they settled down. But there is still a community which is the Banjara community, which may have connection to them.
You know, today the Bartra Sikh community in London is very strong. They've got good businesses, property, but you've got to remember they were the original trailblazers. And what they did is they never gave up their Sikhi. They changed their jobs, but they never cut their hair. Whereas in the 1950s and 60s, when people came to factories, they would go cut their hair and go to Ford factory in 70s. But the Bartras, what they did is they did other jobs. They did whatever they could, but they never ever stopped wearing their dastard. And they were original. Their story's kind of lost because we think, from our perspective, East African migration was the professional Sikhs, but they were here 40 years before that. And now they're so strong property-wise because they bought properties years before we bought them. You know, so they're on third, fourth generation of landlordism.
I think that there's a strong community in Manchester as well.
Definitely.
They got their own Gurdwara.
Cardiff, Bristol, Manchester. The original Gurdwaras in all those towns were Bartra Gurdwaras. Even East London, Bow Road was the first one.
I don't know how far it's true, but they have a negative story as well.
Of course.
If you want to,
I've got loads of those as well. Yeah, I think they're conforming now, because I've been to Southampton and some other ones, and they not openly. They wouldn't. I think the UK Sikh Council and all these people they've had, their weddings are still very exuberant. More so. Right, let's go. But there is a film. I'll show you the link. It's on my channel. You have to touch it lightly. I think it's getting old. Let's go page down and see if there's anything. Oh, we could go to Norwich, because Norwich is quite interesting. Do you know who the first notable Sikh in the UK was? Notable mean like people knew he was Sikh, because there were people before him, but they were Indian or they were just low-level workers or servants. You know, so they didn't even write their names down. I'll tell you how they did. Delete. So this montage is basically all the different parts of his life, right? So he was a sovereign because he was the Raja of Punjab for a very short period. He was the Maharaja. Then he was brought to England under the guise of Christianity, converted, and he became a squire, which meant he was very close to Queen Victoria. He was her godson. She liked to have him at all the balls and parties, etc. And then in later life he became a rebel. And he rebelled against the British and wanted to re-establish his kingdom of Punjab in Punjab. So he's got three phases of his life: one young phase, a middle phase, and an end phase. All of his phases, I think, there's a certain sadness that goes through all of it because his father was very young when his father died, 3, I think. His mother came late into his life, told him his history, and then she passed away in England. She was the first woman to pass away in England. Yeah. His children, the boys did the boys thing, the girls did the girls thing. They were closer to their heritage. The boys kind of went here, there. 1 or 2 of them passed away young. one served in World War One was a gambler. There's only Frederick probably had any contribution to this community in England. It's a very sad story throughout. So if you watch The Black Prince, the whole film has a tinge of darkness through it all. It's not a Punjabi Bollywood type story. It's quite sad, and he was probably the only Sikh who probably felt very out of place. Adopted Christianity, was told by his mother what Sikh he was, and wanted to go back. He never made it back. So there's all elements of his life, all different phases, all stories. But he lived near Norwich, in a place called Thetford, which today is owned by the Guinness Family Trust. That's their headquarters or homes. It's used as film location, nothing else, very empty. But inside it looks like a Maharaja's palace. He had, in the gardens, he had peacocks, elephants, zoo, animals, tropical animals. He had, most of the people in Thetford worked for him as a zookeepers. He's still the world record holder for shooting pigeon, clay pigeon shooting type. He's got the most shots in a certain season. His whole estate was for pheasant shooting, so the royal family used to come and shoot on the Thetford estate. So all these little bits were part of his squire life. And then when he became a rebel, there's lots of other parts in London where he was being kept, an eye was being kept upon him. He wrote lots of letters demanding rights given to him that were in the original treaty, but that were never given to him. So he was trying to use that money then to go back. And then the other interesting thing in Britain is this concept of a pension. So a pension only stays alive as long as you're alive. So he was very worried about his children, because although he was given on paper 100,000, in reality 30,000 a year, his children would have had nothing. So he was very worried what would happen to my children. So there was a big movement to make them lords in the House of Lords, all 6 of them, and then they would get a pension. But the children rejected that themselves. The women said no, and the brothers, it wasn't given to them at all. So he was worried that his children wouldn't have money either. And just to explain it by numbers, the treaty said £100,000 a year to live on this estate. He was actually given about 30, so he kept writing letters to Coutts Bank in London, where's my 100,000, where's my 100,000? He's got 6 children by now, where's my 100,000? And when his cousins came over from India and visited him at Thetford, they said, you're crying here for like 100,000 out of one of your salt mines in India from Maharaja Ranjit Singh that they took. They're making £400,000 on one salt mine, and you're crying, begging for 100,000 here. And imagine how many of those they've got in India from Punjab. So then he said, right, I'm going to the French and the Russians, and we're going to invade from the top. We're going to get it back. So these things are in the books. They're never going to be in the films, the details. But they're all documented. They're in the British Library. There's one thing you can pick. And if you want to be a lawyer, you've got enough cases you can write in your first degree and your postgrad. And you will get a first because no one else has put this down on paper. Chalo, let's keep moving on. We've gone to Norwich.
Have you got any history on Peterborough?
Hanji?
Have you got any history on Peterborough?
Peterborough. The only recent one I had was with the recent passing of Babaji there, I know his son I've seen. I didn't know his dad's story, that he gifted his house to the Gurdwara.
That's right, yeah.
Which interestingly brings us to Manchester United. Let's go there, down the bottom. This is another story, similar to your Peterborough story. Are you from Peterborough?
No, but the friends at the funeral we went to, they explained a couple
But that
of things
story
to us.
you only learnt after his passing. I never knew that.
Yeah, that's right. After he'd passed away. Yeah.
But his story is the same as Bill Singh Landa's story.
Right, okay.
So in Manchester at Munton Road, this is number 15 Munton Road, this was Bill Singh Landa's house. And that room was like some of you maybe have a Babaji's room. So this local Sikh community came to that house. The same story in Peterborough. What was his name? His surname?
Rakbir.
No, but his surname is what I know. His son. Aluwalia.
Aluwalia. That's right. Yeah.
So the same story, Peterborough and Manchester.
Okay.
When his business started to do okay, they wanted to move to not London, move to Bradford. So he's in Manchester. He's seen opportunities in Yorkshire. He's moving on. But what he did, Mr. Landa, his wife and his children, they gifted the house to the Sikh community. They said, keep it, because Babaji's darshan is in this house. He can't sell the house now. So the Sikh community kept it, and then they moved to Bradford and carried on their business. I'm sure Bradford's a distance from Manchester. How many is it? At least an hour or two? You're going from Lancashire to Yorkshire, right? Yeah, so, and then this was 15 Munton Road, Sikh Temple Mosque site. You know, that's 1953, and it still became like a community hub. And this is apparently the same story in Peterborough.
Yeah.
The Ahluwalia family gifting their house as their business grew. They gifted the house to the community. And we have to find a way of keeping these stories alive, because when they disappear, they're gone forever. That's what people don't realise. You know? You have to link with your local library and give them the stuff. You know? They have an archive, and then someone will come in and search it, and they'll do something with it. Because the Ugandan community is very strong at doing this. They don't let that story die. Every couple of years, the local council have to put an exhibition on or do something in partnership. The African community is strong on that. The Caribbean, especially with the Windrush generation, they want to keep that story alive. But our stories are scattered. But they're the same stories. This is the same story in Bristol. You know. But now, imagine, like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't gift my house and buy another house and gift it to a community. How would you even think of doing that now? I couldn't even think that a modern, everyday Singh in 2020 said, I'm going to buy my next house, but actually I don't need the capital from my first house. How could you? But these guys did it, and it was much harder then. You know? So that is still Pyar for Sikhi that we can learn from. You know? Or try and aspire to, but you don't even know that even happened. You wouldn't even think that could happen. You know? So, and that again, there's a website here, they call it bartra.co.uk. Bartra, all Glasgow, Edinburgh, Newcastle, it's all the same story, you know, the same story. But this is 1930s Sikhi, you know, up to the 1950s.
Amazing community.
Yeah, and they stayed to their roots.
Yes,
you know?
it's able to do that.
Yeah, but I can't find their stories in other countries. It seems they all came to the UK. They didn't go to Canada. They didn't go to America in that way, because I don't think they were professionals, were they? They were coming in on a labour base here, and maybe they had the British passport.
After them, the only other people, Sikhs, who came to
East Africa.
were the East African Sikhs who cut their feathers on. But everyone else used to come from India, second day shop. Factory job.
Yeah, I think there was immigration issues. The Indians were classified as coloured, whereas the Chinese were classified as whites. So the Indians didn't
get that allocation.
Canada till much later.
Yeah, but when they did, it was because of a professional status. They were educated.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That's why most of the American Sikhs are doctors.
All doctors. They don't even do law. It's all doctors. QPR, first Sikh woman in the UK, Rani Jind Kaur. She came 1861, I think, passed away 1863 in Kensington, in a road which I've located now, but it's just demolished and it's all changed. But her original house, all the locations are there. But interestingly enough, she came when her eyesight was weak. She was only 45, 46 when she came, but she was already an older lady, and the British thought she's no threat to us anymore. Her eyesight was weak, and that's why you get that story of when she touched his head. She found that the elite didn't have a dastar, and then she explained what Sikhi was to him, and that kind of reinvigorated his interest in his heritage. But she then died in the UK, and when she died in the UK, we had a problem in that no one's ever been cremated in the UK. So she laid in state, and she laid in a cemetery in Kensal Green. So she laid in state in Kensal Green, in the cemetery. Now there's a board there that says Maharani Jind Kaur, and her coffin was draped in white flowers. And until the Leap Singh could work out with the government, how do I do a cremation here? What do you do? And in the end, she stayed for months like that in a coffin, and then her body was taken back to India. The Leap Singh got as far as Aden, but she was taken to Calcutta for her last rites. So in 2010 or something like this, can you see this? Can you make it out? Maharani Jind Kaur. This was in a skip in Kensal Green Cemetery, and what happened is the builder Googled Jind Kaur, found Peter Bance on Google, phoned him and said, I've got something here in the skip that you might find interesting. So they took the stone, and look, it's even got the Gurmukhi from that time. And look, she died aged 44, 1863 it should be. So she was 42 when she came. And they took it and they've rejoined the stone, they've put it in Thetford next to her son's gravestone, and then they've made a commemorative stone at the where this was in Kensal Green Cemetery. You know, there's even guided tours of cemeteries. Can you believe it? I go to cemeteries and there's all these Gore walking around, this Bandhani Akita here, Bandhani Akita. You know, so it's quite interesting. I'm only looking for the Sikh people. So no, she was quite, there's a lot, and I think, you know, there will be a Netflix documentary on her, there'll be films on her, because her story's now getting more prominence. You know. So let's go back to the hall. No, we go page down. This is quite interesting. So even near Queen's Park is the central Gurdwara. So this was the first Gurdwara in, I have to get my dates right now. This was 1913, 79 Sinclair Road. There was a house in Putney in 1911, which was rented from a landlady, where they did keep them, the bars, but they can't locate where that address was because it was just rented. The records in the public records doesn't show Khalsa Jatha, Gurdwara, etc. But they know that when they came to Sinclair Road, that they did acquire. But 1908 was a Khalsa Jatha formed in the British Isles, and it was basically Cambridge students. Sant Tejasin came, and he was sent by, remind me, Baji. Sant Atar Singh Ji. So sent by Sant Atar Singh Ji, because even in the 1890s, Sant Atar Singh Ji felt that Sikhi will only flourish outside of India, because he'd already seen. Yeah. If you think times are bad now, and they are bad now, imagine that 130 years ago, what the British were doing to Sikhi at that time, that he felt that actually, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਨੂੰ ਬਾਹਰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਓ. And Tejasin came to Cambridge, enrolled 5 students he sent. Then he went to Tokyo, he went to California. So he set up Gurdwara in the 1900s, and little Sikh communities all around the world. Then Canada followed. All of them originate after that period, 1908, 1910, 1909. And even went as far as Tokyo. Done some for just.
So then you have the current son who's doing something similar in India now, Barusa.
Barusa. Is he what, outside of Punjab?
Yeah, in Himachal Pradesh and Punjab. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hundreds of schools. Yeah.
Oh, on an education basis, yeah.
Oh, education.
No, but he's not sending missionaries out. To, so.
But that's the idea. They're training young people in Sikhi. So when they go out, they will be trained Sikh people.
Because I think the new organisations are teaching in French, Russian, Spanish. So you can go to South America as well. The Gyanis, which they will become, will be Punjabi, English, plus one other language. And interestingly, when I do the Poland, you know, the Warsaw has a Gurdwara now. So you know, when in the 2010s, when we were all thinking about voting Brexit because all the Polish were here, and we were the racist people saying too many Polish here. In Poland, what they were saying is, where is all our young people? We need labour. Yeah. So they need a bilateral agreement with Delhi to send Indians to Poland. And anytime you get a visa for Europe, the Singhs are going to be at the front of the line from there. So the Punjabis all came to Warsaw. There's like 300 families in Warsaw thinking, so they're there, and they set the first Gurdwara up, and then, but basically they said, we're all working here, we ain't got time to do all this stuff, because they were literally workers. And so the SGPC send the Jatha on a 6-month visa to the Gurdwara in Warsaw, and every 6 months a new Jatha. So the SGPC do some things that help the international Sikh community, which I was, you know, I think we don't see that in the news, but the Jatha is sponsored by the Golden Temple Amritsar, and they take responsibility for making sure the Sikh in Warsaw.
So central Gurdwara, I thought it was Maharaja Patiala.
So this one was the first one. Maharaja Patiala had a house that he used to come to in Putney. He used to use it as a dharamshala. Because when he wasn't there, he would give it to the Sikh students. Then what happened is they met between that period, and he gave them £8,000. And for that £8,000, they were able to acquire 79 Sinclair Road. That's what they did.
This is the Shepherd Gurdwara. Yeah?
So then, in 1969, they moved to Queensdale Road, which is the Shepherd's Bush Gurdwara. But they had to sell 79 Sinclair Road. So 79 Sinclair Road looks like that. It's got a lot of flats. It's just basically, the people know. This is the photo. There's Uddham Singh, and there's Lord Singh, which is on the Wimbledon. He's one of the kids here in that photo. So Lord Singh of Wimbledon actually met William Singh at the Gurdwara, the Shepherd's Bush. He's
Of
in
course,
his
the
80s.
other thing at the same time was the Sikh Gymkhana in Australia, which was, I think, donated again by Maharaja Patala to the Indian community.
Which is now even being run as a gymkhana. It's still there, isn't it?
Yes.
I'll look that history up because I haven't got that anywhere.
Based in the hands of the Gujaratis.
I thought it was a modern hockey club, the Indian gymkhana.
It is. So, all the players, most of the players are Sikhs. Or used to be.
Yeah.
But now it's mostly Gujaratis running.
Yeah, it's like once
it was much bigger site, and they sold it.
So it goes back 100 years to 1908 time. Because he used to come on tours here. He came up to the 1920s, supported the World Wars, bought his Rolls Royces here. And so each time he came, he would give to the local Sikh community something because he had lots of money. He had a good pension. And he was very loyal to the British. So he was given a lot of credence in terms of... This is a very famous photo. Actually gets repeated a lot. But that Gurdwara now doesn't look like this anymore. It's been refurbished again recently.
Yes,
So it looks very
nearly got sold, didn't it?
Yeah. Block of flats.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go here. Let's go back, buddy. Softly this time. Can you move it back a bit. So I have a computer with wire, I've got to press it now. Good. Whew. Right, anyone else? You can pick a logo or just a town or just anything.
Chelsea.
Why do Chelsea? Let's go to Chelsea here. Beautiful. Or Pavilion. Oh, why are they going to Southampton? Let's go. Wait, hold on. Here we go, Chelsea. So in Chelsea, I think, have you been on this tour, buddy? Royal Hospital. So the Royal Hospital has been closed for 2 years now, but next week I start my first tour back at the Royal Hospital. Has anyone heard of the Royal Hospital in Chelsea? Yeah. So anyone see Chelsea football matches where those old men in red jackets sit? They're given about 10 seats behind Jose Mourinho in the old days. They come to the cup finals. They do all of that stuff. So they have a house in Chelsea called the Royal Hospital, and that hospital was opened at the time of Guru Gobind Singh. That's how old it is. So 1666 is when Guru Gobind Singh Ji was born. This was about 1682 to 1690. They built a hospital, and they built it for people who were broken by age or war who would serve the Queen. Even today, people who have served in the forces or the merchant navy can apply, and you go to the Royal Hospital. It's an old people's home, but it's the best old people's home in the world. There's one in France, and this is where the Chelsea Flower Show is, in their gardens. And instead of passing away, they live even longer. So they go thinking they've got 2 years left to live, and then they live for another 20 years because they get the best service, And they've got their own physiotherapy rooms and their gym and everything. It's very nice. So I've been researching there for about 12 years now. This gentleman, I just walked past. Waheguruji Karkals. I was like, what? I sit down. I said, hold on, let me put record, because next time I go, they're not alive. Then he told me his story. He said to me in the Burma, he was in Second World War, and he said, we were in the jungle, and he said, we found a deceased skeleton, but we knew he was a Sikh because he still had his Gurdwara and his dastar on, and he said, then we did the sanskar, and he was telling me that story, and I've got it recorded on my phone somewhere, and but even then he knew what Sikhs were and who they were, and he knew the identity of a Sikh, and he said, we had to give him the rights, because he had the badge on to say which regiment he was in. But they have, in their dining room, all the battles of the Anglo-Sikh wars on the wall to remind them of all the battles they win. And the British Army is the one army in the world that hasn't lost a war. So there's this whole dining room of every war, and it just goes on and on everything. And in that corner is the Sikh wars, and they just carry on all the way through to Iraq and Afghanistan, and then they have 3 blank wars, because they're going to carry on having wars when times are bad. They did
have one. There were 2 Sikh wars, weren't there?
Yeah, so there's the first Sikh war and then the second Sikh war. 4 battles.
Because they did lose one of them, didn't they?
So Firoz Shah and Chilianwala were called a draw, but if you were Sikh, we basically put them on the back foot in the next morning. But by the time we got to Gujarat and Punjab, we'd given up kingdom. So all this history is here. And here, There were 2 guns captured at Chilianwala during the Sikh War. 13th of January 1849, there was 2. Now it's just 1, because that one was actually a copy which was mistaken for Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Maharaja Ranjit Singh had 35 to 40 original cannons. Then he brought the Europeans into his army and they made about 500 cannons. This one is one of the original Punjabi 35 cannons of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. There's experts on this stuff out there. All right? So now we go up close and personal in our tours and you can see them. There's a church in Chelsea, so that was 1849. If you go to 1947, there's a church in Chelsea called St. Luke's. And when you go into St. Luke's Church, there's a chapel. And that chapel is called the Punjab Frontier Force Chapel. Because the Punjab frontier was the border with Afghanistan. So once they took over Punjab, they had a problem. How do we defend this strategic border? Because that's where the French and the Russians and the Afghans will come. And they started to say, well, these Sikhs are quite good fighters, aren't they? So I know we fought them and we just about beat them. Why don't you come and work for us now? You know, because the Apana regiment, and they had 14 Punjab regiments. Then came 1947, and these Punjab regiments are very highly decorated. They are some of the most amazing fighting stories. They took them to all over the place where they needed help. You know? Punjab Frontier Force, they're called the Piffers. Yeah? Then came 1947. And what happens? 1947, the Punjab frontier has actually gone into this new country called Pakistan. So Pakistan said, because we're a new nation. Delhi said, this is Punjab frontier, we don't really care, we don't want it. So they picked up all this stuff from the garrison churches in Punjab, and St. Luke said, we'll take it. And when they got it, they actually created a chapel, and they've got the same covers, Punjab Frontier Force, they've got all the flags, every chair is carved with a Sikh regiment on there, every cushion here, which says Sikh on it, Bill Mobley, is from Punjab from the 1880s, 1890s, 1980s, and you can actually walk in, close your eyes, and you basically smell Punjab in 1849, you know? And I take people there, and in 1999, they closed, and they said, we are now fading into history. We hope that the friendship that we've made in the last 150 years remains in the next. So we went in 2010, I went first, and they didn't even know like what Sikh was. They thought because at that time the Gurkhas were part of the Sikh regiment, Punjab Frontier Force. So we had Musliman, Hindus and Gurkhas, and then Sikhs were the majority in those forces. Well, I don't even know if they were the majority, but they were just called Sikhs, you know. Some regiments were Amritdhari, but not all on the frontier, you know. And so when I went, they thought I was a Gurkha. They'd never even seen a turban come in. So I was like, you know, they took me all around and they thought, because the Gurkhas still come and visit. They've only got 2 chairs. We've got like 27 items there, plus all the stuff, and the stories, and the signatures. Everything is Sikh, 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 Sikh. Sikh, Sikh, look, that's the 12th Sikhs, that's the 1st Sikhs, that's the 13th Frontier Force. They've got 1, Gurkhas, right? And they still come to relive their history, you know? And so now I've been taking groups that we do the remembrance every November, but we've managed to keep it going because once that last Gurdwara goes, there's no one left to do it, and then it will fade into history. You know? Let's see if there's another. Yeah, so this is the chapel there. This is the last one left. And this is the whole chapel. Every one of those chairs is carved from Punjab. And there's 25 cushions and 25 chairs. And I don't want to take too many things there because if they start trying to break the stuff and start saying, well, you know, but I would say you've got to be respectful that they've looked after this for so long. And now we need to build a new relationship just to preserve it.
Well, they're better off in this country than in India.
Yeah, all these walls, all this glass, everything is from Punjab. Is there any more?
Yeah.
No, it's not anymore.
And these will be preserved from away from the Babas who just only converted to San Baba.
Why? But you know the main cathedral doesn't have prayers in it every day. Yeah. They do all their world peace prayers at 9 a.m. in the Punjab chapel every single day since 1951. So there's a little bit of this that kind of feeds in and it just filters in. You know, if there's no one in there, then we can even do Simran in there. There's no problem. They don't say anything to me now. It's just fine. I said, yeah, but I know your bishop's going to come after me if I start doing my own prayers in your space. You know, but they're fine. But it goes a long way if you're, 1, respectful, and 2, you know, so. Right, let's carry on, boss. What comes in? What time are we up to? We're up to, wow. Did we say 8:30? 7 till what? So we can I can do some quick ones or just cover off, or shall I pick some few interesting stories?
Yes.
like different covers. Let's go to West Ham. If it works. Harbant Singh Jabal, first Sikh turban-wearing policeman. There's actually a video about him as well on the website. But he again had to challenge in 1970 to be allowed. He was actually a CID person in Kenya, but came here. He had a Jabal hockey shop, didn't he? His family. They had to do all these other things, but he was a special constable, wasn't even a full police person. Was a volunteer. I think at his funeral, were you at his funeral at Keatingby? They said it was a big event in East Ham. So a lot of people turned up. Ipswich, because I said about that, this is the Punjab general store. Look, all the BBM with the kids. You know, this is 1963. Niranjan Singh Lovely. You know, so they had a store in Ipswich just to be close to their king, as their community. You know. Let's go to Southampton. So this is Osborne House in Southampton. This is the Queen's summer residence. You can go now and see. When the Leap-Sing came on the 23rd of August 1854, he stood here, which is here on the wall. But in 1891, has anyone heard of Baidam Singh?
I've heard of him,
architect. Yeah. So he was shipped to the UK in 1891. He'd already designed, I think, the Khalsa College Amritsar, the Liverpool Agricultural College. He was a foremost architect of his time from Punjab. And there's lots in Lahore that he designed. So the Queen Victoria said, because she was now Empress of India, she needed a tea room. So they shipped over the best architect of his time, Bairam Singh, and here he is, in the magnificent Osborne House. And he spent 1 year here. They didn't even give him a visa, and he created the Darbar. So this Darbar is where Queen Victoria has her tea. Outside is the original painting of Ranjit Singh, the Leap-Sing. This is a peacock throne, a peacock fireplace. You've got all of this, and then this has now been restored. So it had a massive renovation. And this is the amazing part of it. You can go in and see it, but that's why we do the tour, because for half a day it's fine. The seaside is where the Leap-Sing spent his time here when he first came in the UK. Queen Victoria has her own seaside at the Isle of Wight. So if you buy a ticket for Osborne House, you go through, see this. They've got 20 paintings of officers, mainly Sikh, in the India corridor. They've got a lot of the Leap-Sing stuff there, Sapphire stuff there. They've kept it all, and it is phenomenal. You know, every one of these cabinets have got stuff from India here. They've all got gifts when they used to have all the coronations. And then Patiala would give this, Lahore would give this. You know, items, so they put them on display. All the
So this architect by Ramsden, is that the only thing he designed in the UK?
Yeah, because he was sent back after that. So then to say thank you, she got this painting commissioned, and they painted him. And then I thought this was like, so this painting is nearly full size. It's huge. You know, it's like this painting of Bairam Singh is actually that's all. It just looks big. Says that's all, but it's on the wall, and it gets come to the V&A. She wrote a letter of thanks. But you know, he's an architect. So why, if you're doing architecture, why wouldn't you see what he's done? And now they've restored it. And when you go there, it's timeless. You know.
Wow.
You know, it's
a brilliant place.
You've been.
Some of the work he's done in Pakistan as well as in India. I'm not sure about Delhi, but some of his buildings are really classical.
Yeah, Governor's House, Shimla, got the College of Agriculture, Senate House, Punjab University. There's lots. In the style.
Yeah, he was from the Mayo School of Art. He was trained by his Rudyard Kipling's father.
Father or son?
No, father. Rudyard Kipling's father.
Because they had an exhibition on him at the V&A.
Yes.
And this was all featured in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got the book still, but I haven't looked at it too much apart from this fireplace. So it's good. No, that's the main. I'll just go through them like this. Quickly, we've done Liverpool. Milkha Singh, so you've seen the film? He actually won his medal in Cardiff. It was the Cardiff British Empire Games. I've got the whole race there. And it's not quite India-Pakistan type stuff, you know, it's just, that was his first Commonwealth Games medal. So that was in the UK. This is the one you picked first. Brighton Pavilion, what does it look like? Like a Gurdwara, doesn't it? So this was Queen Victoria's father, George 18. He was called the Mad King, the Madness of King George. So because India was such a rich country, and because they were trading, they just wanted something far eastern. The architects who designed this just had a mishmash of Eastern designs, a bit Chinese, a bit Indian, a bit Mughal, a bit Arabic, and they just put it all together as a Lalo Apna palace, you know, and they made it. In actually World War I, this palace became a hospital for Indian soldiers.
Oh, yes.
And when it did, it had 3 kitchens in there. It had 1 kitchen for Hindus, 1 kitchen for Muslims, and 1 kitchen for Sikhs. The first Gurdwara, 1913 was still already a Gurdwara. And what they did was they had a Gurdwara in the grounds under a tent that the king came to visit, and then they would put soldiers on a day trip to London in a van, in that cart, and take them to Croydon, and then take them into Shepherd's Bush, into Sinclair Road, and then bring them back as a day trip to aid their recovery. So this is how the Sikhi, what they understood, and they respected it. The fact that they had separate kitchens for everyone as well.
There was far bigger and sinister story to it. The reason they wanted was the Indian soldiers there, what they projected back so that people would keep joining the British Army, and it was really a PR job.
They needed cannon fodder, they needed they needed people on the front line.
Yeah.
They weren't prepared for war. What Germany did caught them short, because they were busy building empires. They got men from India, put them on the front line. In the hospitals, when you read the letters, these people knew that if they were injured, if they got well, they're going to be sent back. If they made it back to their village, then it's different. In 1918, a lot of Sikhs went back to Punjab, and they said, look, we've been to Belgium, we've been to France, we've been to England. This is not how the British live like we live in India. They have this thing called rights and democracy and these things. We're living under the thumb in India. And then we find the Jallianwala Bagh 1919, the morchas for the Gurdwara Guru Ka Bagh morchas. All they were trying to do was ask for their rights. Because when they left and came to Europe, the Gurdwaras were given to Mahants to look after. And the Mahants started treating them like businesses. And this is an interesting story for Newcastle. Let's go to Newcastle quickly. Right, so this guy is called Charles Freer Andrews. He was born in Newcastle, okay? He witnessed the Gully movement on the 19th and 20th of September 1922. He witnessed this. He's a Christian. He became a good friend of Gandhi's, called Charles, Christ's faithful apostle, because he told the truth. He wrote news. So these morchas are taking place. These are black flag movements. What this means is resistance. The Akalis had taken a vow of non-violence. So they did similar. This is on video. I've got a video about this at Amritsar. They would take Amritsar, go to Guru Ka Bagh, which is 8 kilometres away, walk there. They would take beatings from the police, fill the jails up until the government gave the keys back for the Bagh. The Bagh is the garden. In the garden you had the trees, so you could cut down the wood to make the langar in the langar hall. So what the Mahants did is they said, you can have your Gurdwara back, hun tusi aage jang ladke Gurdwara la lo, so you can have, we keep the garden, you have to buy the trees from us. Right? So they said, no, it's Guru Ka Bagh, you know, and the Gurdwara is called Guru Ka Bagh as well, because it's a garden. And they did this. The British gave the keys to the Mahants to look after, and they said, if we can keep this community in check, then the independence and all these rumblings, we can keep a control of them, you know? Or we can divert their attention. If we can get them that way, focus inwards on the Gurdwaras, then they're not giving us problems in administration. So, Charles Freer Andrews is witnessing what's happening, and he wrote this. And, you can do the eye test.
The brutality and inhumanity of the whole scene was indescribably increased by the fact that the men who were praying to God and had already taken a vow that they would remain silent and peaceful in word and in deed. The Akali Singhs who had taken this vow, both at the Golden Temple before starting and also at the shrine of Guru Ka Bagh, were also, as I have already stated, largely from the army. They had served in many campaigns in Flanders, in France, in Mesopotamia and in East Africa. Some of them, at the risk of their own safety, may have saved the lives of the Englishmen who had been wounded. Now they were felled to the ground at the hand of English officials serving in the same government which they themselves had served.
So that's powerful words, and we carry on.
It was very rare. It was very rarely that I witnessed any Akali Sikh who went forward to suffer flinch from a blow when it was struck. Apart from the instinctive and involuntary reaction of the muscles, that is the appearance of a slight shrinking back, there was nothing, so far as I can remember, that could be called a deliberate avoidance of the blow struck. The blows were received one by one, without resistance and without a sign of fear.
I'll carry on.
1 in 3 of the Sikhs in these jathas had been a soldier and had served during the Great War. A new heroism learned through the suffering has arisen in the land. A new lesson in moral warfare had been taught to the world.
So this is 1922. Mahatma Gandhi's Hinsa movement started later. So he came to Jallianwala Bagh, he saw what the Akalis were doing, and he turned that into a movement which he thought could have an impact. Now that part of the story isn't in the Gandhi movie. Now the Gandhi movie is how we understand history. He came to Amritsar and he came up with Hinsa as the way for the British to have a social conscience. But he'd already said new heroism learnt through suffering has arisen in the land. Moral warfare has been taught to the world. And he was Gandhi's accomplice in the 1930s. He was his kind of confidant. Charles Freer. He's in the London lecture. It's in quite a few. He was very involved in trade union movements, but this is actually what he wrote. And then when British people read this in their own newspapers, they were saying, General Doe, what the hell's going on out in Punjab? You know, you're going around shooting these people you're beating them up, and yet these are the people who served during the Great War. I think on that note, that's what we need to learn from.
Sorry, just a little comment. The people who were beating up these protesters, etc., they were largely, if not exclusively, Indians themselves.
They were Indian, following orders.
Rather than the British.
The officers were always British.
We were happy to serve them as mercenaries.
For a wage, for a weekly wage.
Well, what they were doing was they were giving land, etc., incentives to people who were in charge. So they created another class to rule over the lower class.
I think it was 6,000 British white people in India ruling over 300 million people. So the only way you could do it was through the mechanism you're talking about.
I mean, they often say if every Indian threw one sand rain at the British, they would have all suffocated. Just throw them.
But they did it in a strategic piecemeal fashion of buying out through the ports, you know, because they started in 1600 with these treaties and trades, and they pushed out the Dutch and they pushed out the Portuguese, pushed out the French. So it was slowly but surely, and what happened in 1930 was already 300 years of understanding India and how it works. We were the last area to come in, but the one which they knew the strategy would work because it's worked everywhere else.
We talk about the British taking over India for 300 years, but we never talk about the Mughals taking over India for 700 years.
In another period.
Right, in another period. So something in the psyche of the Hindus of the time was not right. Just giving it all the time.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, or look at our own psyche isn't right.
So I think that's where these little histories, but especially for the young people, you know, whatever you do in the next 50 years or whatever you're doing even now, you can use our own history to guide you. You know, because
actually, what you've shown us here is brilliant because people need to know history, you know, to know what's going on so they can take the actions in the future. Without history, you're nobody. You just try to emulate an English person. But once you know you have history behind you, then you know you are a Sikh. You know why you're wearing a turban.
Yeah, no,
right?
I think so. Yeah.
Otherwise, you just think, why am I wearing a turban? When you have history behind you.
I mean, everything that's happened with the farmers' protest for me, and people are saying, you know, maybe Sikhism isn't a constructed religion. We're always going to be active to uphold the truth, right? That's our religion, right? So trying to structure it in a Christian way, which is what they did in the 1880s. Maybe we were never meant to fit that model. We were always going to be, because the truth is so much harder to uphold then falling in line.
It is.
You know?
That's why we suffer so much, because we always uphold rights. We're always fighting for rights.
I must say, I would slightly disagree with you on the farmers' movement. I think the amount of damage, the land, the pollution, etc., and
That's not.
No, I know what I mean is, what I meant was after the farmers' protest, people are saying, it wasn't just the Sikhs, it was Haryana, every farmer came, but the spotlight by the media is put on the Sikhs, which is fine, but we are starting to question more than just, what we are beginning to question ourselves to say, after a year of that, maybe it's an awakening for some to get closer to Sikh or,
Essentially what you said was that what the farmers did and was really Sikhi in the Sikhs. They're the ones who upheld it. They're the ones who started.
And they were much
Punjab.
older than us. They were
They're
much
the ones
older
who
than
brought
us.
into Delhi, right? Everything else is secondary, but that Guru and the fighting spirit of Delhi, we always fight for rights. That's what carried the whole thing.
I think it's going to be interesting, like in the next few years, when other films going to start coming out. How are they going to portray what happened? Because they will. There is films about Punjab '84. There is films about the 1990s. Depends who makes the film. How is it funded? We know what that's going to be, But what I'm saying is that are we clever enough now to put our funding and our resources into the mainstream and present our story, or are we going to let?
I think our first thing was we built Gurdwaras, right? And we run our Gurdwaras very well, but we need to come out of the Gurdwaras now.
In the UK.
In the UK, right? We're too embedded into the Gurdwara still.
Well, I think
Gurdwaras are needed. They are our foundation.
But I think my own story is, we had, we served in a Gurdwara. I did stay teaching Punjabi school for a long time. Social media, like it's given me a way to step out and bring this stuff out. But I'm still at heart trying to just deliver a Punjabi school lesson that I do in a camp, right? That's all I'm doing. But whether I teach at a university or at a conference or here, it's essential. But we have to give our kids that confidence to say, use your education, if you end up bringing Sikhi into your degree, you're putting it on paper for 100 people to learn, then it's going to go on the internet as a dissertation. That's going to be available on a search, and then it's going to inform someone somewhere. We can't just keep it as presentations hidden away on PowerPoints that disappeared. That's what I feel is we have to bring that element of it. Personally, I feel the last 10 years we have been very good at bringing the Gurdwara out onto the street. We're doing so many street langars in London, helping the community with at least being fed.
That was good as well.
Amazing. The positivity we get, but the next set is let them understand other aspects of Sikhi. We're not just langar distributors on a rainy Tuesday night in Ilford or Trafalgar Square. Learn about Sikhi, and they do, but I only see the serving bit. I don't see the prachar bit that comes through. Let them just understand, because they support us. When like Priti Patel said her stuff about extremism, the amount of people that said, no, the Sikhs do a wonderful job, the Sikhs do, they're not extreme, and they acted on our behalf, because they've seen what Sikh, and we can only do that with the people we work and the people we talk to, but through Langar they've actually found another side of Sikhi outside of the Gurdwara. But I feel we've got a lot, it's like the Sikh statues of World War I. They will always be popular because World War I is in the psyche of a British, but we're going to have 10, 15 now. We still haven't got a Sikh statue of a woman. Why can't we have Safaya or Jinda? Which Gurdwara is going to do that instead? We're all doing the same soldier.
Keep doing what you're doing, and the message will.
I think these
people like you and people like Harkirit and who are doing a lot of good work in the community.
But this stuff isn't hard, so you guys can pick it up. It's just, and you will get more confident with it. So we are trying to build a team.
I hope the young people here pick up something and they will take it.
So this particular Charles Freer entry was this new heroism.
Yeah.
This is again the same thing of Bhavaniya, Kahaniya, Pussaput Kara. The fact is we had this level of tolerance and as of no regret of undergoing a physical pain for a bigger cause. Now we had that during Shahidi Adikom, all the Matama and all that, they saw their own.
But it is, what I find is when we go to Gurdwaras and we have all those iconic images.
Yes.
But yet, if I just ask one person what is it, they don't know.
Yeah, so what I'm saying here is, because these Akali and all the Sikh have got this history by their side. They knew about their heritage quite well, and then it may be new to this guy who saw this new heroism, but the fact is for them it is not new.
No.
And it is not new for us to show that tolerance. For a bigger cause, we are ready to undergo, and we accept physical pain. And this is what they were doing during these
but but when you're nurtured in a UK environment, we have a cotton wool. I'm talking about myself and we have this cotton wool approach around us, right? It's so much more harder to step into risk when we're being told to de-risk our whole life. Education, university education actually makes you so analytical you don't take a risk, is what I believe. So entrepreneurs take a risk, they become big, and they say I didn't do a degree. Because when you do a degree, you spreadsheet it all up and you say, well, I'm not going to make more than I need, so I won't do that business. So I find that maybe the whole system here is conforming to de-risk, and where our stories actually tell us to stand out, but our system, everything I've seen in the school education system, it's play it safe, don't take a risk, you even have to have yellow jackets on to pick up litter in the street. I'm just like, come off it, when we do litter picks, the kids have got more PPE on than they got, and it's only a crisp packet, because you're not going to get typhoid from it. Come on, blimey. Gloves paake, yellow jacket paake, hand litter picker like so you spend £500 on litter picking equipment, and in fact, check it all back, because he's out of and that's
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Are you going to thank them? Come on, man.
I never thought you'd come to this.
Why?
But I knew Rav from before 2018, I think.
Something like that,
I used to live in Salisbury, so I think...
used to come on my walks, but one of the furthest travellers.
So it used to take 90 minutes on train to get to London. So, and then I think it just kind of grew from there. And I've been with you to Oxford, and I've been to what other far-flung place?
Oh, we've done quite a few in London, Brighton.
So anyway, the season is starting to open.
Yes.
I mean, there was lockdown, obviously, nothing happened then. But
Then I went online.
Yeah, so really, that's how I got to know Rav, and then through Rav, and I found Rav had connections with other people. So Rav is not just himself; he's a big resource.
Yes.
And then I thought, well, I told you I was moving, and I promised him that he'll get an opportunity to come and enlighten us somehow. And second attempt we succeeded.
Second attempt, you're not coping. No, but thank you for coming. I know it's a Wednesday, it's an evening. I work in the week, so I can do this in the week. Saturday, Sundays is more difficult for me. But the afternoons I do go to the program on there. So I've enjoyed it.
I just hope that we have made a connection, and that many of you will come on his walking tours.
Yeah. We want that one to say, Police only how. Thank you.
Oh, they're 3 hours. We see about 6 to 7 places. They're family friendly. They're Punjabi English, French. It's all. I'd say just come and then give me the feedback, and then I just build them. They're always one borough: Westminster, Chelsea, Camden. And if we go far, we just jump in the train.
Very interesting.
It's slightly different. But no, thank you for contributing as well. One